Hey there. All right. So my name is Alex Castillo, and I'm doing my historical figures project on Olaudah Equiano. And the approach I'm gonna sort of take on him is a who, what, when, where, why. Um, so I'm gonna kind of start with why I chose him. So I chose Olaudah Equiano because we know so much about his life, starting at an early age all the way into adulthood. This is largely due to the fact that he was completely literate, and that's going to be a big topic that I'm going to discuss later on. I also thought he was just very interesting as far as getting to know him and his life and what he went through, and getting to know more about slavery because of his experiences. So yeah, now we're gonna move on to who is he? So Olaudah Equiano was an African boy from the Igbo people, which is current day Nigeria. And as a slave, his name got changed a lot. For instance, after being abducted and taken onto the ship to go across the Atlantic during the Middle Passage, his name was changed to Michael. And after he was sold into slavery, his first owner named him Jacob. And then after being sold once more to Mr. Pascal, he renamed him for a final time. This would be his name for the rest of his life, Gustavus Vasa. And so that begs the question, why am I calling him Olaudah Equiano? That's because that's the name he uses only during his writings. So now we're going to kind of jump to where did everything happen? Because that's where he really starts to stand out as a slave and just a black man during his time. So during his time as a slave, he did an extraordinary amount of traveling, which is what makes him so interesting, or part of it. As I said earlier, he was an Igbo boy in present-day Nigeria, and upon being taken into slavery, he was put on board a ship with 244 other slaves who were taken to the British West Indies. From there, only a few were taken to Virginia. In Virginia, that's where he was sold to Mr. Pascal, where he served many years of his sentence. Served many years of service. And he was eventually taken to London as a valet. After serving Mr. Pascal for many years, he was sold to Mr. King, who was in the Caribbean. So as a slave, Equiano, his duty was working on the ship and helping the crew. So he was basically a sailor. So working for Mr. King, one of his duties was transporting goods between Georgia and Barbados. So eventually, Equiano bought his freedom and struck a deal with a former slave master to start a sugarcane plantation in South America. So as you can see, he did an insane amount of traveling as a free man and a slave, which makes it really interesting. You know, he went London and Virginia, the Caribbean, South America, which is crazy even by today's standards. So what makes him so special? As you'll see me stress a lot in this video, I believe what makes him so special is his ability to read and write, as well as his travels around the world. Because his writings were so descriptive and so powerful, he brought a strong message against slavery, which people really bought into after reading his autobiography. And what makes him so special as well is his social mobility that he had. During slavery, it was typically very frowned upon to educate your slaves. However, at a young age, Equiano was very liked and very favored by Pascal, and he sent him off to school to learn to read and write, which was extremely unusual during this time. So now we're gonna move on to when, and when is just kind of like a recap of like more specifically when all this stuff happened. So Equiano lived from 1745 to 1797, and in 1765 he was about 20 years old. He was in his 20s. His master, Mr. King, offered the opportunity for Equiano to buy slavery. And so only 1 year later, in 1766, he purchased his freedom. I believe it was for about $5,000 in today's money, which is an insane amount to only earn working as a side business, selling fruits and other goods, so which is crazy. So only a few short years later, he moved to England, where that would become his permanent residence for the most part. He would do a lot of traveling still, but that's where he would become a permanent resident. So in the 1780s, that's when he got really involved in the abolition movement, and he became really involved. And the 1780s is also when he wrote his autobiography. It was in 1789. It was titled "The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano." So yeah, that was a big year for him. So this brings me to my last point, which is why. Why is all of this significant? So Equiano's life can be considered quite significant because he lived such an atypical life for a person of African descent during his time. His life starts like most others, being taken from his home and sold into slavery, but it really starts becoming interesting once he learns to read and write and becomes more than just a slave. He becomes a sailor and travels the world, and during this time he gets to see how other societies function with and without slavery. And then, I'm sorry, he's able to buy his own freedom and become a free man. So as a free man, he becomes an abolitionist. In his autobiography, Equiano gains a lot of attention because of his experiences that he discusses, and the horrors of slavery. The fact that he came out alive and a free man. One sec. It was just an extraordinary event. It helped share his horrendous experience in great detail. His autobiography gained a lot of attention and helped develop an anti-slavery movement in England, in Europe, and in North America. And so after England lost the Revolutionary War, they took a lot of slaves from the Americas, and they weren't necessarily slaves. They offered freedom to blacks who helped them fight. So they took these blacks and they went and took them to England. But in England, they didn't have a lot of opportunity, really. So part of Equiano's abolition movement, he worked a lot with free, poor black people in England. And by working with them, he helped them to gain economic opportunities. He's a very prominent figure in the black community, and he was heavily involved in abolitionist groups such as, the Society for Abolition of the Society for the Abolition of Slave Trade, and the Sons of Africa. So much of what Olaudah Equiano experiences in his life is really extraordinary. And the fact that it's all so well documented in his autobiography is even more astonishing. So overall, he's just a really great figure, just person to do this historical figure project on. So yeah, thank you.